Let's speak to Paul Kehoe, who is chairman of Luton Rising, that owns London Luton Airport. Thanks for coming on the programme, Paul. What has your day been like today?
Tom, good evening. Yes, well, I woke up this morning. I think, like most people, I was taken aback that here we have a single point of failure, all our eggs in one basket. And actually, bizarrely, I wrote a paper in 2014 on this very subject, how we needed new orthodoxy for aviation. What we need to do now is ensure that this critical national piece of infrastructure, which Heathrow is, it's so important for our economy, gets the support that we need to give it to ensure that we get those flights back in the air and to try and understand what went wrong and how we can make sure it doesn't happen again. But it has been a challenging day for everybody, and I think we all need to rally round the team at Heathrow and British Airways and the other airlines to make sure their passengers get where they need to be.
Is London Luton Airport reliant on one electricity substation for its power?
Well, there's always a single point of failure somewhere in the system, but no, we're not. And I'm not going to go into any details on that, but suffice to say, one of the questions that we've asked is there a single point of failure? Been reliably informed there isn't, and that we have got sufficient backup in place to ensure that operations continue. And that was also true at the other airports that I've run in the UK, at Bristol and at Birmingham and Belfast. We had a series of plans that if this would happen, it's high on our risk register. But ultimately, if a power station fails, you can have all the substations you like, but if your source of electricity goes, it is a challenge.
Yeah.
And this has been demonstrated to be a very difficult day for Heathrow. But, I know the CEO there, and I know exactly what he'll be doing. And he's a good man with good leadership. And I'm sure he will be motivating his team to get the right result very quickly.
Well, we may well be about to hear from him shortly. But, Paul, you are therefore surprised that the biggest airport in this country, one of the biggest airports in Europe, is so vulnerable if the power substation has a problem?
Well, as I said, Tom, I was taken aback this morning to find that there was no power at Heathrow. And it is on everyone's risk list, and there are plans in place. But when you keep going back up the network to a point, there's always something that could fail, that could overload the system. And one of the things that we need to understand, and I challenge the National Infrastructure Committee, which is in transition itself to a new organisation, is to make sure that we have the resilience and that we have a network of airports that can back up Heathrow and support it with rail travel. We're doing that through HS2 and the like. But we do need a system in place, a system approach that allows us to be flexible. And when we get a failure, because, sure, eggs, we had 9/11, we had the liquids ban, we had the IF Yellow Yuckle volcano, things stop, and it's how quickly we can recover. And that is the challenge for us as an industry. And we need the leadership. And I think, to be fair to the government, the Secretary of State for Transport has led well on this. Not just this, but also on the airports debate. And that's what we've lacked over the last few years. And she's gripped it. And I think we're having a plan to go forward, which will hopefully reduce the reliance on one particular airport.
Paul, good to speak to you. Thanks for coming on. Paul Kehoe, chairman of Luton Rising, that owns London Luton Airport. 5:09. Dr. Bob Seeley is a security expert, former Tory MP, who is the author of a new book called New Total War, which will be out in July. It sounds like it's going to be a barrel of laughs, that, Bob, if I'm honest. Thanks for coming on. Talk us through your thoughts about the counter-terror police investigation into this fire.
Okay, I think the problem is if they're looking for evidence, causing a fire, it is difficult to find proof and linking it to an organisation, because a fire is a fire and you can look at people's modus vivendi. But one of the things, okay, let's just assume it's sabotage. And frankly, I don't think it is. But if it is, how do you prove it? For example, we know that the Russians, we assume the Russians started a fire in an East London depot, which was linked to a Ukrainian business back at the end of last year. There's also been arson and sabotage in South Wales, an incident. There have also been explosions at arms dumps around Europe. Getting the evidence is pretty difficult unless you can link it by communications or by looking at individuals. And the Russians are increasingly, because so many have been kicked out, not only because of the Ukraine war, but because of Skripal, the poisoning of Sergei Skripal a few years ago now, The Russians have been using the deep web to hire organized crime to do some of their sabotage work. But then again, you still have to prove a link. So I think it will be very difficult. And right now, the assumption is surely that it's an accident of some kind. But you're right, it shows intense vulnerability. And we have a just-in-time culture throughout the Western world, which is very easy to sabotage if you know what you're doing.
Why would the assumption be that this is an accident?
Because it's very easy to say Russia's behind everything nowadays. And I don't want to start accusing people unless I have real hard evidence of that. So I think it's very important to be careful at this stage.
I totally agree.
Point finger.
But it's also important to keep an open mind, as the police are clearly doing. I think as Downing Street is doing, as I guess you are, Bob. But
yeah,
it would fit the pattern, wouldn't it? If it were to be a rogue state recruiting. It doesn't necessarily need to be a KGB agent. No. It can be someone recruited for a couple of £1,000s to go and do something like this.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at what they're doing in Ukraine, they're hunting down and attracting teenagers on the dark web with, getting them to gambling, pornography, or just offering them money to carry out acts of sabotage. It's very basic, very low level, but it's a sort of thing that the Russians are doing, and they're doing it using organized crime in Western Europe and in the United Kingdom. I think the most useful thing now is to stress that it is quite easy to sabotage modern society, whether you're a fringe or extreme climate change group and you want to shut down the M25, or you want to just do industrial harm. Do you remember that fire, that massive explosion about 20 years ago at that oil refinery? Was it near Hemel Hempstead or Bedfordshire? That was a faulty valve. And if you know what you're doing, it is very easy to cause huge amounts of damage in modern life. The people who look after our critical national infrastructure, and there's an agency linked to an agency, so to speak, they raised their game when the IRA started bombing the City of London. So you had the Ring and Steel, etc. And a lot of these bollards that you see in places like Whitehall, they look nice, but they're also there to stop lorries, traveling at 50 miles an hour, with 2 tons of explosive on the back of them. So there's a security purpose for all of that. So the centre of London has been physically protected. We are now learning how to do cyber protection after the relentless cyber attacks on the army and elsewhere. But we're also, looking at how you can protect physical infrastructure. Russian 7th generation warfare, Tom, to come back to the point about sabotage, is thinking about not only climate weapons, but also how you stop a society from functioning, attacking, using massive infrastructure attacks, like a sort of Pearl Harbor on banking and airports and traffic lights and everything working together in harmony or disharmony to bring a society to a standstill.
Very good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on. Bob Seeley, security expert, former Conservative MP. New book is called New Total War.